Okay, I think the quality is not bad. That looks better. Okay, let's get started then. We're looking at commas again today. I wanted to look at some more complicated aspects of commas, but I hope that everybody walks away from this class understanding that the main thing to always question with a comma is whether it's essential information or non-essential information, and I hope to show you different situations where we can see if it's essential or non-essential information. So first of all, I want to talk about while and as. Both of them have at least two meanings. While could mean at the same time. Yeah, he was reading his newspaper while I was reading my book. It means at the same time in that situation. But while can also mean whereas, in which case it's offering contrast. And contrast is very important because if the second clause is a subordinate clause and it offers contrast, then we use a comma. So while can be used as a contrast. For example, while he likes orange juice, I like apple juice. But I could equally turn those two clauses around and say, I like apple juice while he likes orange juice. And if I do that, I would use a comma because there's contrast there. So while has two meanings, and as can mean the same as while at the same time. Yeah, he was reading his newspaper as I was reading a book. And you'll see this meaning in the number one. So it could mean at the same time, but as can also mean because, since, and as can also mean in the way that, and we'll see that in example number 3. So before I start, I just want to make it clear that there's different possibilities that we have when we're making a sentence. We could have a subordinate clause and then a main clause, in which case you have a comma after the subordinate clause. The subordinate clause is non-essential information. The main clause can stand on its own, and so it's non-essential. You can also have a main clause and then a subordinate clause. Now, we don't use a comma if the subordinate clause provides essential information to the main clause. Usually that means that it defines a noun in the main clause or provides essential information so that we know which noun in the main clause. However, there's also a possibility C, where we have a main clause and then a comma and then a subordinate clause. And here the subordinate clause provides non-essential information, extra information, or possibly the subordinate clause provides contrast. So contrast or non-essential information with the subordinate clause second, and then we need a comma. So let's see this in practice. Look at some of these examples. While or as I was running to the station, comma, the train arrived. Now I hope you can see, this may not be clear, but I hope you can see that this is the main clause and this is the subordinate clause. We couldn't just say as I was running to the station. What's that? I don't like with subordinate clauses. I prefer as. Like is a preposition, and so as should be used with clauses and like with nouns. I think I did this a couple of lessons ago with as and like, so please watch that lesson on as and like. I made it about 3 days ago. As I was running to the station is subordinate clause. This is the main clause. We need a comma. Okay, that much is clear. I hope that number 1 is very clear to everybody. But we could also say the train arrived as or while I was running to the station. And with it this way round, we don't use a comma. Here, this is defining while as I was running to the station. It's essential information. It's telling us the train arrived at the same time as I was running to the station. And without it, it means just something very different. We really do need this to tell us more information about the main clause. So it's considered essential here, and we don't have a comma. Yeah, the train arrived while I was running to the station, or the train arrived as I was running to the station. It's really essential that we include this because this is the main focus of the sentence. Now, if we change the sentence a little bit and use a different kind of as, and I want you to see that this is a very different kind of as. As when it means while, if they come second, then very often there's no comma. Usually there's no comma when it means at the same time. But if we say this, the train arrived late, as I expected, then this is being used in a very different way. It doesn't mean at the same time I expected, it means in the way that I expected. And here, this is extra information. It's not important. We could take it away and still the train arrived late. So let's have a look at the next one. The train is often late, comma, whereas while though the bus is usually on time. Now I hope you can see that this is contrast. This needs a comma because it's contrast, and this one needs a comma because it's additional non-essential information. Okay, so the different meanings of as, they're used very differently. When as means in the way that, it really does need a comma if it comes second, because usually it's additional non-essential information. When it means at the same time, normally it's essential information. Okay, let's have a look then at whose. Now here we're really looking at relative clauses. If you're unsure about relative clauses, I've got another lesson on relative clauses, and I mention them quite often because they're quite interesting. So have a look at this sentence. He is the man whose son won the trophy. We don't use a comma here, even though this is the main clause and this is the subordinate clause. We still don't use a comma. This is kind of part B here, main clause plus subordinate clause with no comma. And I hope you can see that this is essential information. It tells us which man. It tells us which man. We don't know which man beforehand. We often call relative clauses defining relative clauses like this. And it's a good word because it means that it defines which man. It tells us which man. If we add a comma, it's not telling us which man. You already know which man if we use a comma, and this is just extra information. So look at number 2. He befriended my brother, comma, whose son won the trophy. Now here, we know which person it is. It's my brother. Probably only got one brother as well, or at least the listener knows which brother I'm talking about. And this is just non-essential information. It's just telling us some extra information that the son of my brother won the trophy as well. So here we have a comma. It's non-essential information. Okay, and probably I have one brother, or the listener knows which brother I'm talking about. That would be fine as well. Okay, look at number 3, which is because. Because is a little bit different, and you need to understand that this is really when you have a negative verb before the because. We didn't win because we were slower. Now if we just have that sentence, we didn't win because we were slower, it can mean two different things. It can mean we didn't win because we were slower but because of something else, or it could mean we didn't win because we were slower. And so which one do we mean? Well, if we don't have a comma, we mean that it was something else. We didn't win because we were slower, comma, but because we were weaker. Yeah, we don't use a comma if this is not the reason why we didn't win, but this is the reason why we didn't win. And it's also good style to put in the reason then, if you're going to say it wasn't because we were slower, it was because we were weaker. However, if you use a comma, then that means we didn't win, comma, because we were weaker. And that gives you the reason then, the reason why we didn't win. Okay, so use a comma with because if the following part does tell you the reason why you didn't win, but don't use a comma, and that basically moves this part all into one clause. We didn't win because we were slower, it will become one clause then, but because we were weaker. So it all depends what you mean in this kind of sentence. You can see that it's ambiguous until we use commas. The commas clear up the ambiguity. So very important, this comma. As soon as we take it away, it means we didn't win because of something else. But as soon as we add it, it means we didn't win because we were weaker. Yeah, because the fact that we were weaker means we didn't win. So use the comma if this is the fact which explains that negative verb. Okay, so that's because. If you have any questions about that, put them underneath. That does work logically in all situations, so I want that to be very clear. Number 4, we're going to look at when the subclause is inside the main clause, because it's not just after the main clause. This is a little bit simplistic. Actually, we can put subordinate clauses inside the main clause. And so what happens when we put the subordinate clause inside the main clause? Well, the first example I've got is a relative clause. My sister, whose name you already know, is a doctor. Now, this means if we don't have a comma, this part here is defining which sister. So I must have 2 sisters, at least, maybe 3, maybe 5. If I don't use a comma, I must have more than one, because this part here is defining which sister. It's telling us which sister, the sister whose name you already know, and not the sisters who you don't know, the sisters who you have no idea what their name is, okay? You mean the sister whose name you already know. However, if you've only got one sister, and that person knows exactly which sister you're talking about, then you say, my sister, comma, whose name you already know, it's just extra, non-essential information, is a doctor. Okay, that's a relative clause, and really the difference between defining and non-defining relative clauses, I've gone through it quite a few times now, but if anybody's still unsure, please put an example below the video and I'll try to help you, but I need an example at least, and I'm not going to just check that the sentence is okay. Make it into a question. Look at the next one. The teacher, scribbling on the board, took no notice of us. Now, as it is, without commas, and this part, by the way, is called a participle, an adverbial phrase. It's a participle phrase. It's also a reduced relative clause. It's a reduced relative clause because we could say the teacher who is, or who was, scribbling on the board. Who was here, because I've got took, I've got past tense there. So the teacher who was scribbling on the board took no notice of us. It's a reduced relative clause, and without commas, it sounds like there are more than one teacher. Maybe you have 3 teachers in the room and you're telling me which teacher. You're saying the teacher scribbling on the board took no notice of us, and not the other 2 teachers who were sitting down at the back of the class, but the teacher scribbling on the board took no notice of us. However, if there's only one teacher in the classroom and the listener knows exactly who you mean, then you use commas. And this becomes non-essential, non-defining. It doesn't define which teacher. It's suddenly just extra non-essential information. So we say the teacher, comma, scribbling on the board, comma, took no notice of us. So yeah, my teacher would probably be with commas because you probably only have one teacher. But maybe you've got 3 teachers in the room, I'm not sure. And if you have, then, and you're trying to tell me which teacher with this information, then take out the commas and say the teacher scribbling on the board took no notice of us. Okay, this is a participle phrase, and I'm going to show you one more participle phrase located at the top of the hill. So here's the subordinate clause. It's really a phrase rather than a clause, because I believe a clause has to have a verb in it. I'm not sure if we can count participles as verbs or not. They're very often called verbals. They're called non-finite verbs as well. But I just want to show you the basic idea here, where if the person already knows which village, then this is just extra information. The village, which you already know, located at the top of the hill, yeah, I would even say the village that you already know, comma, located at the top of the hill, comma, has the best views. Okay, it's just extra information. But maybe you have a map in front of you and there are lots of villages on the map, and you're talking to your friend, then you would say that this is defining which village, and we get rid of the commas and we say the village located at the top of the hill. The village which is located at the top of the hill, it's a reduced relative clause again, has the best views. So without the commas, you're defining which village. With the commas, it's just extra information and the listener already knows which village. And by the way, I could take out the word located here, take out the participle, so that it's just a prepositional phrase. So definitely then there's no clause there, and so we're not really dealing with a subordinate clause inside the main clause, but just a prepositional phrase, and still the same applies. We can say the village at the top of the hill has the best views, but you probably want it to define which village, and say the village at the top of the hill has the best views. Okay? So you can see we're always dealing with whether it's essential or non-essential information. Although also do think about contrast with while, though, whereas, and those kind of contrasting words. I've done a lot of videos on words of contrast. Okay, that's all I've got for you today. I hope that makes sense. does get very confusing with commas. I do sympathise. So if you have any questions, please put them under the video. Okay, thanks very much. See everybody very soon.